So welcome and thank you very much for everybody for joining, and we'll talk today about pogo connectors. And we'll go through two or three things. The first is we'll talk about what they are and how they work and what those key features mean. We'll then talk about why pogo connectors are so useful for certain applications. And then we'll actually take a look at one or two of those applications as well to give you some inspiration for where you or your customers might be able to use this type of connector within their design. So let's take a quick look at the pogo connector to begin with. Now, a pogo connector is a two-part connector, the same as most other types, but what this type of connector uses is a spring-loaded pin that provides the secure joint, the secure electrical joint between one half of the circuit and another. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the form that a pogo pin takes, what it is, how it works, and we'll compare that to maybe some more traditional contact technologies to give you an idea of why this thing is so useful. So if we want to talk about a normal connector, this is a normal pin and socket type arrangement. We have a male pin on the right and a female socket on the left. And in order to make them, the male pin is inserted into the socket. And what happens is that the force that's applied here is what provides the secure electrical joint between one half of the contact and the other. And this is broadly how most standard connectors work. If we look at a pogo connector, it works a little bit differently. So in order to go through how this works, let's break down the components of a pogo connector and talk about how each part is important. So the first part is the plunger. This is the male part of the pin that actually makes contact with the other half of the connector. It's housed in this body, and behind the plunger, the male part of the pin, is a spring. This is a coil spring, standard steel type spring. And this is what applies that pressure between the two halves of the contact that actually provides us with the secure joint. And then finally, we have the other mating half. So you can see already the big contrast between a standard male and female pin arrangement. With a pogo pin, we have a moving part and a static flat plate that it mates up to. What that means when you actually see it in use is that as you push the pogo pin against its mating half, the spring here will compress, and that's what provides the mating security, the joint between two halves of those contacts that gives us the electrical joint that we need. So that's broadly it. That is how a pogo pin works. And for those of you who aren't aware, it takes its name entirely from the pogo sticks that you might have found many years ago jumping around as kids, the big sticks with the big springs that you jumped on. It takes its name entirely from that, just proving that the electronics industry sometimes isn't as mature as we would like it to be. But a pogo pin is a spring-loaded pin that provides the force to join two halves of an electrical circuit together. So we've described what a pogo pin is, and we've compared it a little bit to how a traditional pin works. So let's talk about why these things are important. So we've looked at the mechanism by which a pogo pin mates with its opposite half. So we push the pin in towards the mating half, the spring compresses, and the force that's applied, the normal force that's applied between the two pins, applies directly onto the end of the contact there. And let's compare this again with how that works in a standard pin and socket arrangement, but this has an important aspect when it comes to reliability. So if we go back to the pogo pin, all of the spring force is being applied by this spring. It is exactly what it is. It is a spring. It's designed to retain energy and apply that normal force against the mating half. And if we look at a pin and socket arrangement, as you place the pin inside the socket, the force is applied at the mating points there. The spring force, the actual spring energy that's retained that provides that force, is held at this point here. What's actually happening is that the body of the socket contact is flexing. And that's what's providing this normal force that keeps the two halves of the contact together. Well, that's important for a couple of reasons, because the body of the connector itself is what's applying that force, and that has an impact on long-term reliability. These contacts are generally made of brass, copper, a relatively soft, springy metal. But what happens is that at these points here, after repeated use, you'll start to see some element of fatigue. What will happen is the metal will relax. You might even get micro fractures, or little crevices in the metal here that start to relax the spring force between those two halves. Well, the spring force is what keeps the two electrical contacts together, which is directly the result is that it provides the electrical continuity between one half and the other. If that spring starts to relax, then the efficiency of that electrical contact actually can start to degrade. So long-term reliability depends upon the springs within the contact, and the pogo pin, by using that steel spring within the body of the contact, you're not actually putting any strain on the body of the contact. It will last longer. So long-term reliability is a key point behind pogo pins and why they're so useful. Another aspect is the alignment. So connectors generally need to be aligned fairly accurately when you're plugging them together, and that takes a certain element of precision. And there are applications where applying that precision can be a little difficult. Let's say, for example, you're reaching behind a piece of equipment, you're trying to plug the connector in by feel. That can be tricky. That can limit the accuracy that you can apply, and you stand the danger of damaging pins. And let's look at that in real terms when it comes to a pogo pin. As you're plugging the connectors together, the mating area, the target effectively for the end of this male pin, is a large flat surface. So if this connector is slightly misaligned to one side or another, it actually doesn't make a difference. You've got a nice big target area that makes it very easy for these things to be plugged together under somewhat tricky circumstances, blind mating behind a piece of equipment, for example. It also means that movement and vibration during use isn't going to damage the connector. So the alignment is an important part of what makes pogo pins useful and reliable in these circumstances. And even axial misalignment. So when something isn't necessarily lined up correctly, that it's at an angle, you can see from the way that the pogo pin mates with its flat surface that it is very tolerant of this kind of misalignment that you might find in real world applications. Well, let's compare that to a standard pin again, where you've got the male part going into the female part. If that pin is trying to get inside the socket, it's a very small target, certainly compared to the pogo pin that we've just seen. So we need to be very much more accurate with our alignment. And if the socket is misaligned, you're actually causing more damage at this point, because you're spreading those arms of the female contact wider than they should go. So when it comes to any kind of alignment problem within a connector, pogo pins offer a real advantage. And that's one of the key things that we want to talk about today is that tolerance when being used actively and lots of times in an industrial environment, in a harsh environment. And in fact, one of the features that we've got with some of the connectors that we're going to talk about later is the ways that we can assist that alignment. So these are two forms of pogo connectors that are available from EDAC, and you can notice in this case we have magnets on either side of the connector, and those magnets serve a couple of purposes. The first is to keep the two halves of the connector together and helps keep that spring force directly in line with the socket and make it a very reliable connector. The other thing that you can do is actually polarize these magnets and make sure that you cannot plug them in the wrong way round. So if you've got a north and south poles on either side of these two connectors and the opposite arrangement on that one, then they can only go together one way, and you cannot get them put together the wrong way. So those magnets serve a number of different purposes that really help with this alignment, really make it a user-friendly type connector in these difficult circumstances. If we look at this circular type, this is even better because it doesn't matter the orientation of the two halves of the connector. You can see that the pads of this part are entirely circular. So as long as the two halves of the connector can be brought together, it doesn't matter the rotational misalignment. It's very tolerant of that type of situation. And we'll come along to a couple of applications later on where that is so very useful. The same problem with misalignment is actually true when you're disconnecting the connectors as well, when you're unmating things. For a traditional plug and socket type contact, it is still essential that you pull the connector apart in the same alignment as they go together. The damage that can be caused when you're pulling a connector at a funny angle can actually damage the connector beyond use. And if you're talking about any kind of quick release application, and again, we'll come on to some of these later, but let's think about wearable technology where you've got maybe glasses, headsets, down to radios or devices that are worn on the body. You need a situation where if you get caught up on a door handle or a piece of equipment, you need your connectors to come away cleanly so that you're not causing any danger to the user. And that is sometimes not possible for a standard plug and socket connector because you can only pull it apart as long as the two forces are aligned. Well, with a pogo pin, certainly one that's held together with magnets, they can just break away very simply. And in fact, it also makes it very easy to put them back together when you have a free moment to reconnect your headset or your glasses to your device. It's a very user-friendly product when you've got that orientation problem. So it doesn't matter what angle you pull a pogo pin connector away from its mating half, it will come away cleanly. Another aspect of the performance of a pogo connector is to do with the damage that's caused during the mating and unmating cycles of a connector. And this has implications to do with reliability. It also has implications to do with efficiency. When we're talking efficiency, we're talking about the efficiency of the electrical signal or power that's being transmitted through a connector. So when you are putting two pogo pin type products together, the small surface area here, it's not being rubbed, it's not being wiped, it's entirely two parts coming together and a spring applying force at this point. There should be no damage between the end of the pin and the pad, making it a very reliable long-term solution for a number of reasons. And let's compare that again with a standard pin and socket arrangement. When the pin is inserted into the socket, there is a wiping movement. There is a scraping of two metal surfaces together along the entire area where those two parts are in contact. Now, that's one of the reasons why we use gold plating for a contact arrangement like this. Gold not only is a very good conductor of electricity, it's a very low friction material. It's got a low coefficient of friction with the idea that it actually, it's to a certain extent, it's self-lubricating. It prevents too much damage when you've got this scraping movement between two halves of the contact. But realistically, with repeated use, damage does occur even on a gold plated surface. If you were to magnify the image of the actual surface, you'd start to see crevices and pits and scrapes. The surface of the metal would look like the crevices you see on the surface of a glacier with all sorts of gaps. And that has a real impact for electrical performance. Efficient transmission of power between one contact and the other depends upon the best surface area between those two parts. With a completely new contact, you'll have a nice big surface area that's making contact between the two parts. But if you've got damage to that surface, what's happening is the amount of surface area that mates between the two contacts is reduced, and the electrical efficiency is reduced because you've got an effective increase of contact resistance, electrical resistance. You're trying to pass the same amount of electricity through a lesser area of contact. The electrical resistance goes up. Well, that has implications for all sorts of electrical connectors. If you're trying to pass a low power signal through this kind of thing, maybe you've used a sensor to detect a very low signal, any resistance actually reduces the amount of energy, the fidelity of that signal that's going through the contact. which means at the other end, it's going to be that much harder to analyze and detect that signal. So you're deteriorating the performance of the connector for a signal application. If you're trying to transmit power through the same type of contact, an increased electrical resistance will actually mean you're having a lower efficiency. You're losing more energy through that contact to heat, and the amount of energy that's going through will reduce. So the surface damage, although it would appear minor after repeated use, it has an important impact on the life of a contact. And when it comes to pogo pins, because you're not having that scraping movement, because it's simply a pure pressure, you shouldn't be getting the kind of surface damage on the front of the contact that you would get in this situation here. It means that the connector will last longer. And if we talk about performance, we summarize the performance. I've got here that the current rating of 2 amps per contact, that's just on one of the sizes of the contact that we produce, but there's different sizes of contact, and we can actually use this sort of thing for charging of certain applications. It will take a decent amount of current, and because of the way that the connectors work, if we skip to that very bottom point, we can be talking about a mating cycles, the way we measure the life of a connector, of anything up to 30,000 mating cycles. If you cast your mind back to one or two of the Tech Tuesdays that we've talked about in the past, and we talked, I think the very first one, we talked about push-pull connectors, which are high reliability connectors for signal type applications in industrial use. We were talking about mating cycles of 5,000. So to give you an idea of the reliability of a pogo type connector in certain circumstances, it's actually superior to that kind of high-end instrumentation connector. It gives you an idea of why these things are so useful. But they're also very easy to use. They are very tolerant of the misalignment that we talked about, depending upon the design of the connector you have. That could be alignment, it could be rotational alignment. They are very tolerant of being put together in a number of different ways. And if you include maybe the magnets in the connector that keep them together, that actually helps with that alignment and makes it easier to use. And because of the design, they are very resistant against shock and vibration. They're very useful for industrial applications. So with those features in mind, let's take a look at some of the applications that these things can be used for, and actually already are. So this is one of the important things. Pogo pins are a proven technology. There is a very good chance that you are already using a pogo pin, whether you realize or not. So these are standard wireless earbuds that seem to be popular nowadays. And you'll see from the enlarged section of this image that the charging that goes on within the box is actually provided by 2 small pogo pins for each one of the earbuds. If we had a different, the picture was aligned slightly different, you'd see 2 small gold pads on the bottom side of those AirPods, and they just mate simply and with a sprung-loaded pogo pin inside the case. Close the lid, and you've got a reliable connection for charging your earbuds. And this is just one example of many that already exists. But let's look at some of the other applications of why pogo pins can be such a good solution. Well, let's look at 2 or 3 things. We'll start on the left here. We'll start with robotics. So these are autonomous mobile robots. They're self-driving robots that you are starting to see more and more in the factory environment. They deliver goods from one part of the factory to another. They might be used in packing applications within a warehouse. They go away, they bring the products to the picking line. The operator doesn't actually have to move. The robot's doing all the work. But these robots are battery powered, they need to be charged, and each one of these robots will have its own charging station that it will go to and it will back into, and it will stay there until it's charged. A conventional pin and socket connector means that that process would have to be very precise for the robot backing into its charging station. But if you were to use a pogo pin with all those advantages we've talked about, the tolerance against misalignment, the easy target that it's got, the simple pressure that's going to be provided by the robot pushing into its mating station, it's a very simple solution that's very reliable for charging in this kind of situation. We've got an industrial robot here, but we've got robot lawnmowers out, we've got robot vacuums in your home. All of these have the same need for an alignment and a mating that isn't dependent upon a human plugging them in. If we look at the top right application. This is wearable technology. Now, wearable technology for a lot of people at the moment, you start thinking about smart watches and say lifestyle type equipment that people use for fitness and for general well-being. And many of these devices actually already use pogo pin type charging stations. I know that the smartwatch we have here in the home has got a couple of pogo pins on. I looked at them a couple of times when researching for this presentation. They are very common. But wearable technology has gone beyond simply having a smartwatch on your wrist. Wearable technology is now becoming a key part of the industrial situation. Industry 4.0 has given way to Industry 5.0, where we are seeing robots and humans collaborate in the working environment, and we are seeing additional technology that the operators can use, things like augmented reality. And that's the image on the bottom right there. We've got operators that have either virtual reality headsets or augmented reality glasses, where the technology is providing them with an additional display in their glasses to help them do their jobs. And the links between the glasses and the equipment that's worn on the body need this kind of quick release type connector, and a pogo type connector is ideal for that application. So wearable technology is simply going to explode when it comes to the number of applications that we can use them in, all the way from smartwatches to wearable for the industrial user to all sorts of things out and about in the real world. Pogo pins and pogo connectors offer superb advantages for those applications. And then we look at maybe some other things that might be a little bit more familiar. The first, on the left-hand side there, we have commercial and consumer type products. So tablets, computers. The idea of having quick charging stations has become more and more popular. I was going to use an image of a standard walkie-talkie type arrangement where you can have a cradle with a number of walkie-talkies, all of which are being charged by pogo pins. That's an established technology, but that will become more and more common as people demand simpler, easier to use technology that doesn't require necessarily plugging in, and is becoming a part of everyday convenience. The picture on the top right is another example of wearable technology. Here we have a soldier, but this could be any kind of professional user. It could be firefighters, emergency services personnel, paramedics. It could be surgeons in a medical environment, again using augmented reality or additional lighting. All sorts of different wearable devices are suitable for this kind of quick release, easy mating connector. And at the bottom right there, this is a very large application. I've only got the one image here, but it does describe a lot of different possibilities for use with this type of technology. So here we have a robot arm. We talked about Industry 4.0, Industry 5.0, where robots are becoming more and more common in the working environment. But one of the requirements of these robots is that they are flexible, that they can change their role very quickly to respond to changing demands. Well, that might be a robot arm that has a number of different tools that it can use depending on the job it's being asked to do. And those tools need to be quick change. So you need a robot arm to be able to come and pick up a tool and then use it. And again, alignment and plugging the tool into the robot arm requires a certain amount of precision. A pogo connector avoids the need for some of that precision and makes it far easier for a robot to have a whole series of different tools that it can pick up very quickly, use, and then put down. And this is one of those areas where the incredibly long service life of a pogo connector, those 30,000 mating cycles, is ideal because a robot might be changing those tools many times a day. It's a way of providing the reliability that you'll need in that industrial environment. So that's given you a few ideas of where pogo pins might be used. Some of them will be familiar. The idea of the earpods with the pogo pin charging in the case might be something that's familiar to you already. But there are lots of other places where this technology can be used. And hopefully what we've done here is given you a few ideas that you might be able to use in your designs, or your customers might be able to use in their designs. So to give you an idea of what can be done. And when we talk about what can be done, one of the important points to say here is that these are a highly customizable product. We could sit and talk about the standard product range, and there is a standard product range that we have available. But even then, the number of times we see a customer who looks at the standard product range and says, great, love the idea, but can you make it a bit different? Well, this slide simply shows some of the things that we can change within the connector design to make it suitable for one application or another. And starting at the top, we can change the contact pitch, we can change the distance between each contact, we can change the amount of force that's required to keep the contacts together, and in fact we can change the plunger depth, the distance that the plunger will move depending upon the application that you require and the overall size of the connector that you need. We can talk about the standoff distance between the two contacts, because the two connectors don't necessarily need to actually physically touch as long as the pogo pins are touching. These are things that can be changed. Termination style, cable mount, PCB mount, and talking about cable, we can actually produce connectors like this overmolded onto a piece of cable, so that you've got that quick release cable design that you want. The cable doesn't have to have a pogo pin connector on both ends. It could go to a standard USB on one end, so it plugs into a normal computer type application. It could have a mil circular on the other end, depending on what you need it to do. That provides a huge amount of flexibility when using this kind of quick release type connector. We can change the plating and the finish. We can increase the amount of gold that goes onto these contacts for increased reliability. We can change the geometry, the shape. Doesn't have to be in line, doesn't have to be circular. If you want a triangular shaped connector, let's talk about it. Let's see what we can do. And we can change things like magnet strength, the amount of effort that you need to apply to break the two connectors apart. You don't want them falling apart just in everyday use, but if they get hung up on a door handle, like we've said before, you need them to pop apart. So these things are tunable. So it gives you an idea of all of the different things that can be done with a pogo pin connector. It is possibly one of the most versatile connector designs that we can offer you. Standard pin and socket connectors are great, and we've got lots of options, but if you want something truly customized for a specific application that requires high mating cycles or quick release functionality, then the pogo pin might offer you the very solution that you or your customer has been looking for. And let's just talk for a couple of seconds about how that fits into the overall range of the EDAC group of companies, the EDAC products, the MH products, Norcomp, and all the other bits and pieces we've got. Just to give you an idea, we have a broad range of connectors. The pogo pins are simply part of them. And that's one of the things that we can help with in terms of pogo pins can form part of an ecosystem of connectors. You might not need them for every application. You might need a standard rack and panel connector. You might need an edge card that we talked about last month. But we also have these pogo pins, and we have the ability to combine these technologies to make something that's truly suitable for your design, for your customer's design. If we look at some of the products in more detail, we have everything from D subs and USBs through to some of the more specialist connectors. You can see the magnetic pogos at the top right there, but we also have other pogo pins that aren't necessarily magnet type arrangements. We have the ability to incorporate them into other connector designs, and we have push pulls and all sorts of other little bits and pieces within this range that gives you the power to be able to truly create the product that you or your customer needs. So these are the contacts that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. This is the team that you need to have a chat with. If you have any questions after the presentation, if something comes up in your mind and you think, I'd like to take a look at that, I'd like to find a little bit more, then please reach out to your contacts in different parts of Europe. They will be able to connect you either with information, with some samples. If you need to talk to a connector designer to talk about a specific custom product, these are the people to talk to first, and we can put you directly in touch with the technical team and they can help you out. So thank you very much for watching and learning a little bit more about pogo connectors. They are not the most common connector in the world, it must be said. Pin and socket types are far more common, but there are times when a pin and socket arrangement simply will not do the job that you need it to. As we said, high reliability, ease of use, the possibility of misalignment, the need for a quick release type connector. That's what makes pogo pins really, truly useful. So I hope you've been able to take a little bit of inspiration from this presentation. As I say, feel free to talk to us about your designs, or feel free to reach out to your customers, let them know what we've got here. And if you need additional support, please let us know. Thank you for joining us. There'll be another Tech Tuesday at the beginning of next month, and we'll send out some more details about the topic that we're going to cover then. Until then, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.